This incompetent will finally embarrass herself. After this deal, I'm done with her. I stared at the text message glowing on Carter's tablet screen, my coffee growing cold in my hands. The words felt like ice water in my veins. 6 months. 6 months I had poured my heart, soul, and every waking moment into preparing for tomorrow's pitch meeting with Gravora Group, the deal that would make or break our consulting firm, Thornland Analytics. My name is Serena Webb, and for the past 8 years, I've been building something I thought was ours. Carter and I started this business together in Portland, Oregon, working 16-hour days from our cramped apartment, surviving on instant noodles and determination. I was the strategist, the one who crafted our proposals and presentations. He was the charmer, the face that clients loved. At least, that's what I believed. The tablet had been sitting on our kitchen counter, forgotten after Carter rushed upstairs to take what he called an urgent client call. The screen lit up when I accidentally bumped it while clearing dishes. What I saw made my stomach drop. The message was sent to someone named Roni with a heart emoji next to the contact name. Veronica, his assistant, the woman who'd been working late with him far too often these past few months. I scrolled up through their conversation, my hands trembling. Months of messages, intimate jokes, plans for after the divorce, detailed discussions about how they would push me out of the business once this Gravora deal was secured, how he'd been telling potential investors that I was just the background support, while he was the real brains behind the operation. The cruelest part? They'd been laughing about my dedication, about how hard I'd been working on this presentation, staying up until 3 a.m., perfecting every slide, rehearsing every talking point, about how I had no idea what was coming. "Baby, you should see her scrambling around thinking this is her big moment," one message read. "She has no clue that tomorrow is the day I finally get rid of the dead weight." Veronica had responded with laughing emojis and a message that made my blood boil. "Can't wait to celebrate afterward, just you and me running the show." I heard Carter's footsteps on the stairs. Quickly, I placed the tablet exactly where I'd found it and pretended to be loading the dishwasher. My mind was racing, but my face remained calm. 8 years of marriage to a manipulator had taught me how to hide my emotions when I needed to. "Everything okay down here?" Carter asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. His touch, which once brought comfort, now felt like a snake coiling around my shoulders. "Perfect," I said, leaning back against him with a smile that could have won an Oscar. "I'm so excited about our presentation." He squeezed me tighter. "Our presentation? That's right, sweetheart. We're going to crush it together." Together. What a beautiful lie. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. I woke at 6 a.m. as always, went through my usual routine of yoga and meditation, then headed to our home office to do final prep work. Carter was already there, looking fresh and confident in his navy suit, the one I'd bought him for our anniversary last year. "Big day," he said, not looking down from his laptop. "Are you feeling ready?" "More than ready," I replied, settling at my desk. The presentation was loaded on both our computers, backup copies saved to the cloud. Every slide was perfect, every statistic verified, every argument bulletproof. I'd spent the last 6 months researching Gravora Group's pain points, their competition, their growth projections. This wasn't just a pitch, it was a surgical strike designed to address every concern they might have. What Carter didn't know was that I'd also spent the early morning hours making some additional preparations. A quick call to my divorce attorney, Rebecca Hayes, whom I'd worked with on several client cases, a discreet email to our accountant requesting copies of all business financial records, and, most importantly, setting up a recording app on my phone. "I'll make us some coffee," Carter announced around 9 a.m. The meeting was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. via video conference. Gravora Group's leadership team would be joining from their headquarters in Seattle, along with their legal counsel and 3 potential investors. I watched him move around our kitchen with the same easy confidence he'd always had. He was handsome, I'd give him that. Dark hair with just enough gray at the temples to look distinguished, green eyes that could charm anyone, a smile that had convinced me to trust him with my heart and my future. But this morning, I saw him differently. The way he hummed while he worked, Was he actually happy about what he was planning to do to me? He returned with 2 matching black mugs, his and hers coffee cups we'd bought during our honeymoon in Italy. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Here you go, honey," he said, setting my mug down with extra care. "Drink up, you'll need the energy." The coffee looked and smelled normal, dark roast, just how I liked it, but his smile was too sweet, too deliberate. I took a small sip and watched his face. Was that satisfaction I saw flash across his features? "Thank you," I said warmly. "You always take such good care of me." His phone buzzed. Veronica, no doubt. "I need to use the bathroom quickly before we start," he said, already moving toward the hallway. "Can you pull up the presentation? I want everything ready to go." The moment he disappeared, I sprang into action. I switched our mugs with practiced efficiency, placing his in front of my computer and mine in front of his. Then I settled back into my chair, pulled up the presentation, and waited. When he returned, he sat down without glancing at the mug, took a generous sip of what he thought was his untainted coffee, and smiled at me with perfect oblivious satisfaction. The meeting was about to begin, and so was his downfall. At exactly 10:30 a.m., our computer screen filled with faces. Lawrence Thorne, Gravora Group's CEO, appeared in the main window, a distinguished man in his 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Beside him sat Simone Delaney, their chief operating officer, and Patrick Rossi, their head of business development. 3 additional windows showed the potential investors Carter had been courting for months. "Good morning, everyone," Lawrence said, his voice clear through our speakers. "We're excited to hear what Thornland Analytics has prepared for us today." Carter straightened in his chair, his confident smile firmly in place. "Thank you for this opportunity, Lawrence. Serena and I have been working tirelessly to create something we believe will transform your operational efficiency." I noticed he emphasized Serena and I, making sure to position himself as the leader. But as he reached for his coffee mug to take another sip, I caught something else, a slight tremor in his hand. Interesting. "Before we begin," I interjected smoothly, "I want to acknowledge what an honor this is. Gravora Group's reputation for innovation precedes you, and we're thrilled to potentially partner with an organization that shares our commitment to excellence." The investors nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of respect and professionalism they expected. Carter shot me a quick glance. Was that irritation, or was the substance he'd intended for me already beginning to affect him? "Shall we dive in?" Carter asked, clicking to the first slide. "Our analysis indicates—" He paused, blinking hard. "Our analysis indicates that Gravora Group faces 3 primary challenges in the current market landscape." His voice was still strong, but I noticed he was speaking more slowly than usual. Lawrence leaned forward slightly, his attention fully focused. These were sharp business people. They'd notice any sign of weakness or unprofessionalism. "The first challenge," Carter continued, "is operational redundancy across your regional offices. Our research shows—" Another pause. He rubbed his temple with his free hand while reaching for his coffee with the other. "Shows that you could achieve 18% greater efficiency through streamlined processes." I watched the investors' faces. They were listening intently, but I could see subtle signs of concern beginning to form. Carter was stumbling slightly over words that should have been second nature to him. "The second challenge involves data integration," I said, seamlessly taking over. "Your current systems operate in silos, which creates delays in decision-making and reduces your competitive advantage." As I spoke, Carter took another long drink from his mug. The irony was exquisite. He was essentially poisoning himself with his own treachery. But I kept my expression neutral, professional. This had to look natural. "Carter, would you like to elaborate on the technical aspects?" I asked sweetly. He blinked several times, clearly trying to focus. "Yes, absolutely. The technical aspects are quite complex, but essentially—" His words were beginning to slur almost imperceptibly. Lawrence's eyebrows rose slightly. In the business world, this kind of unprofessional behavior during a critical presentation was career suicide, and Carter was about to make it much, much worse. "Carter," Simone Delaney's voice cut through the silence as my husband stared blankly at the screen, his mouth slightly open. 20 minutes had passed since the meeting began, and what had started as subtle confusion was now becoming impossible to ignore. "I'm sorry," Carter said, shaking his head vigorously. There's something—" He reached for his coffee again, taking another gulp as if it might clear his head. The substance, whatever it was working exactly as he'd planned it to work on me. "The data integration challenges are significant." That was when Lawrence Thorne's expression shifted from polite attention to genuine concern. "Mr. Summers, are you feeling all right? Perhaps we should reschedule if you're not well." I saw my opening. "Lawrence, if I may," I said, my voice calm and professional. "Carter has been pushing himself extremely hard to prepare for this presentation. He was up until 4 a.m. last night making final adjustments. Perhaps I should take over while he collects himself." It was a masterful move. I appeared caring and professional while subtly suggesting that Carter's behavior was due to exhaustion rather than incompetence. But more importantly, I was positioning myself to salvage what he was destroying. "That would be appreciated," Patrick Rossi said from his window. "We're very interested in hearing the full proposal." Carter tried to protest. "No, I'm fine, I can—" But as he attempted to stand, he swayed slightly and had to grip the edge of the desk. The investors exchanged glances that spoke volumes. "Please, darling," I said, standing and gently placing my hand on his shoulder. "Let me handle this. You've done so much work already." To the camera, I added, "I know every detail of this proposal as well as Carter does. We've been true partners in developing this strategy." What I didn't mention was that I had developed 90% of it myself. Carter had been the presentation face, but I'd been the brains behind every analysis, every recommendation, every innovative solution we were proposing. I smoothly transitioned to the next slide. "As I was saying, your data integration challenges create a ripple effect throughout your entire operation. Our analysis of your Q3 reports shows that information delays cost you approximately $2.3 million in missed opportunities. Now I was in my element. This was what I'd been born to do: take complex business problems and create elegant, profitable solutions." As I spoke, I watched the investors' faces transform from concern to interest to genuine excitement. "Furthermore," I continued, clicking to a detailed chart I'd spent weeks perfecting, "our proposed implementation timeline would have you seeing measurable results within 90 days, with full optimization achieved in 6 months." Lawrence leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. "These metrics are quite ambitious, Mrs. Webb. How confident are you in these projections?" "Completely confident," I replied without hesitation. "We've modeled these scenarios using data from 3 comparable companies, and in each case, our methods exceeded projected outcomes." Behind me, Carter was trying desperately to regain his composure. He'd managed to sit back down, but his face was pale and he was blinking repeatedly, as if trying to clear his vision. The substance he'd intended to humiliate me with was systematically destroying his credibility instead. "This is impressive work," Simone Delaney said. "The depth of analysis is exactly what we'd hoped to see." "Thank you," I said, genuinely pleased. "This project represents months of research and strategic thinking. We understand that you have multiple consulting firms competing for this contract, which is why we've gone far beyond surface-level recommendations." As I spoke, I noticed one of the investors, Natalie Vance from Kalen Moore Partners, taking notes furiously. That was always a good sign. In my peripheral vision, I could see Carter fumbling with his coffee mug again, clearly confused about why he was feeling worse instead of better. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. He'd planned to watch me humiliate myself, to use my supposed failure as justification for pushing me out of our business. Instead, he was witnessing my finest professional moment while experiencing the very fate he'd intended for me. But this was only the beginning. The best part was yet to come. If we could move to the implementation timeline, I said, advancing to slide 12, you'll see that we've broken the project into 3 distinct phases, each with measurable milestones and success metrics. Lawrence Thorne nodded approvingly, but his attention kept drifting to Carter, who was now gripping the arms of his chair as if the room were spinning. "Mr. Summers, are you certain you don't need medical attention?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "You know what?" I said, as if the idea had just occurred to me. "Carter, why don't you step away for a few minutes, get some fresh air, maybe splash some water on your face? I can handle the rest of the presentation." Carter looked at me with confusion, and was that fear? He was beginning to realize that something was seriously wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. Yes, maybe that's a good idea," he mumbled, struggling to stand. As he left the room, swaying slightly, I turned back to the camera with a concerned but professional expression. "I apologize for the interruption. My husband has been under tremendous pressure lately. He's incredibly dedicated to this project." "Of course," Simone Delaney said kindly. "Please continue. This presentation is fascinating." And continue I did. Without Carter's presence, I felt a freedom I hadn't experienced in years. This was my work, my expertise, my moment to shine. I moved through the remaining slides with precision and passion, addressing every question with detailed knowledge that clearly impressed our audience. "Your competitive analysis is particularly thorough," Patrick Rossi commented. "How did you obtain such detailed insights into Gravora Group's market position?" 3 months of deep research, I replied honestly. I personally interviewed 15 industry experts, analyzed 5 years of market data, and conducted focus groups with your target demographic. This isn't theoretical, it's based on real-world intelligence. I could see the excitement building in their faces. These were business people who appreciated thoroughness, and I'd given them exactly what they were looking for. My phone, which I'd set to record at the beginning of the meeting, was capturing everything, not just the presentation, but also Carter's gradual deterioration and my seamless takeover, evidence that would be crucial for what came next. "Mrs. Webb," as I approached the final slides, "this level of preparation is exceptional. How long have you been developing these strategies?" "I've been working on variations of this approach for over 2 years. When we learned about the opportunity to work with Gravora Group, I adapted and refined these concepts specifically for your needs." What I didn't mention was that Carter had contributed virtually nothing to the strategic development. He'd been focused on schmoozing potential clients at expensive dinners, while I'd been doing the actual work of building our business. "The financial projections are compelling," Natalie Vance interjected, "but implementation is where most consulting projects fail. How do you ensure successful execution?" I smiled. This was where I truly shined. Accountability is built into every phase: weekly progress reports, monthly milestone reviews, and quarterly strategic assessments. Plus, I personally oversee every major implementation step. "You personally?" Lawrence asked. "Absolutely. This isn't a project we hand off to junior staff. When you work with Thornland Analytics, you get our senior-level expertise throughout the entire process." I was being careful with my language, subtly positioning myself as the primary resource rather than Carter, but I was doing it professionally, focusing on capability rather than making any negative comments about my husband. As we moved into the final phase of the presentation, I felt a surge of confidence I hadn't experienced in months. This was going better than I'd ever dreamed, and the best part? Carter was missing his own professional destruction. The presentation concluded to enthusiastic responses from all participants. Lawrence Thorne looked genuinely excited, Simone Delaney was asking detailed follow-up questions, and the investors were clearly impressed by what they'd seen. "Mrs. Webb, this has been outstanding," Lawrence said. "I have to ask, is this level of strategic thinking typical of your work?" "It is," I replied confidently. "I believe in going beyond surface-level analysis to uncover the real opportunities for growth and efficiency." "How soon could you begin implementation if we move forward?" Patrick Rossi asked. "Immediately," I said. "I've already cleared my schedule in anticipation of this project. My full attention would be dedicated to ensuring Gravora Group's success." Again, I was careful to use I rather than we, not inaccurately. I truly was the one who would be doing the work, but it was also strategically positioning myself as the primary resource. That was when Carter stumbled back into the room, looking even worse than when he'd left. His face was ashen, he was moving unsteadily, and there was genuine confusion in his eyes. "How's everything going?" he asked, his words noticeably slurred. Now the contrast was striking. Here I was delivering a flawless presentation with confidence and expertise, while he could barely form coherent sentences. The optics were devastating for him. "We were just discussing implementation timelines," I said gently, as if speaking to someone who was clearly unwell. "Why don't you sit down, honey?" Lawrence Thorne's expression had shifted to one of concern mixed with professional assessment. In the business world, reliability and professionalism were everything. What he was witnessing would raise serious questions about Carter's capability to handle a multi-million-dollar project. "Mr. Summers," Lawrence said carefully, "perhaps we should continue this conversation when you're feeling better." "No, no," Carter protested, trying to inject energy into his voice. "I'm fine, just tired. Let me walk you through the final recommendations." But when he tried to advance to the next slide, he clicked the wrong button and accidentally closed the presentation entirely. The fumbling that followed, his desperate attempts to reopen the file while clearly struggling with basic computer functions, was painful to watch. "It's all right," I said smoothly, reopening the presentation on my computer and sharing my screen instead. "Technical difficulties happen. Here we go." I guided the discussion through the final points with professional grace, making Carter's struggles look like minor hiccups rather than major red flags. But the damage was done. These business leaders had seen everything they needed to see. As the meeting wound down, Lawrence made a comment that sent chills down my spine. "Mrs. Webb, your expertise is exactly what we're looking for. We'll be in touch very soon with our decision." Not your company's expertise, not Thornland Analytics' expertise, my expertise. After we ended the call, Carter slumped in his chair, looking confused and exhausted. "What happened?" he asked. "I felt fine this morning, and then—" "You've been pushing yourself too hard," I said with false sympathy. "Maybe you should go lie down. I'll handle any follow-up with the clients." As he struggled to stand and make his way to our bedroom, I sat alone in our office, contemplating what had just occurred. The meeting had gone better than I'd ever imagined. I'd not only salvaged what Carter had tried to destroy, I'd potentially secured the biggest contract of our careers. But more importantly, I documented everything. The recording on my phone captured not just Carter's deteriorating condition, but also his admission that he'd felt fine that morning before drinking the coffee he'd prepared. The trap he'd set for me had caught him instead. And now it was time to spring a few traps of my own. Within an hour of the meeting's conclusion, I was already implementing the next phase of my plan. Carter was upstairs sleeping off whatever substance he'd intended to use against me, while I worked methodically to secure my future and expose his betrayal. First, I called Rebecca Hayes, my attorney. "Rebecca, it's Serena Webb. We need to meet today. I have evidence of my husband attempting to drug me, plus documentation of his plans to steal our business." "Serena, that's a serious accusation. What kind of evidence are we talking about?" Audio recordings, text messages, and witness testimony from a business meeting where he inadvertently dosed himself with whatever he'd put in my coffee. Can you meet me at 4 p.m.? Next, I forwarded the screenshots I'd taken of Carter's text conversation with Veronica to my secure email account. Then, I sent a carefully worded email to Lawrence Thorne. Dear Mr. Thorne, thank you for your time today. I wanted to follow up personally on a few details from our presentation. As you may have noticed, my husband seemed unwell during our meeting. This morning's incident has made me realize that I need to address some personal matters that could affect our professional relationship. I want to assure you that my commitment to this project remains absolute, and my ability to deliver results is in no way compromised by these personal circumstances. I'll be available by email and phone for any questions you might have. Sincerely, Serena Webb. It was professional but hinted at underlying issues without being explicit. Lawrence Thorne was shrewd enough to read between the lines. Finally, I called our business accountant and requested an emergency audit of all company finances. I need documentation of who contributed what to the business, including intellectual property, client relationships, and financial investments. By 3 p.m., I'd also visited our bank and opened a separate business account in my name only, transferring the funds I could prove I'd personally contributed to the company. The intellectual property rights were trickier, but Rebecca would help me sort through those. Carter was still sleeping when I left for my attorney's meeting. I left a note saying I'd gone to run errands and would be back by dinner. Let him think everything was normal for a few more hours. The irony was delicious. He'd spent months planning to push me out of our business, thinking I was too naive and trusting to see it coming. But his own arrogance had blinded him to the most important fact. I'd built this company. I was the strategist, the researcher, the one who created the solutions our clients paid for. He'd just been the pretty face delivering my work. Now he was about to learn exactly what happened when you underestimated the woman who'd made your success possible. At 6 p.m., I returned home to find Carter awake but still groggy, sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of tea. The irony of him drinking something I'd prepared wasn't lost on me, though this time it was just harmless chamomile. Feeling better? I asked, setting down my purse and affecting a concerned tone. I don't understand what happened, he said, rubbing his temples. I felt fine this morning, then suddenly I could barely think straight during the meeting. I probably ruined everything. Don't worry about it, I said soothingly. I managed to salvage the presentation. Actually, Lawrence Thorne seemed quite impressed with our work. Carter looked up sharply. Our work? Well, the strategic analysis we developed together, I said carefully, though I did most of the talking after you started feeling unwell. I watched his face as the implications sank in. If I'd successfully completed the presentation, then his plan to watch me fail had backfired completely, but he couldn't figure out how or why he'd been the one to fall apart instead. Did they say anything about moving forward? He asked. Lawrence said they'd be in touch soon with their decision. I think we have a real chance. What I didn't mention was the email I'd received from Lawrence just an hour earlier. Serena, after today's presentation, I'm confident that you're exactly what Gravora Group needs. Let's schedule a call tomorrow to discuss terms. I was impressed not only by your strategic thinking, but also by your professionalism under difficult circumstances. Best, Lawrence. The contract was mine, the business was mine, and tomorrow Carter would learn exactly how thoroughly his life was about to change. As we sat there sharing dinner, him still confused about his mysterious illness, and me quietly planning his downfall, I reflected on how poetic justice could be. He tried to drug me into a professional humiliation. Instead, he drugged himself into obsolescence. The revenge was just beginning, but already it was more satisfying than I'd ever imagined. 6 months later, I sat in my new office overlooking downtown Portland, reviewing the latest quarterly reports from the Gravora Group project. The results exceeded even my optimistic projections. We'd achieved a 22% efficiency increase and saved them $3.8 million in the first phase alone. The divorce had been swift and decisive. Rebecca Hayes had presented such compelling evidence of Carter's attempted sabotage and planned theft that his attorney had advised him to settle quickly. I'd retained full ownership of Thornland Analytics, along with our client list and all intellectual property I could prove I'd developed. Carter had tried to contest the settlement, claiming he'd been drugged without his knowledge, but when the toxicology report revealed traces of a mild sedative, something easily obtainable but requiring premeditation to use, combined with his text messages plotting to remove me from the business, his credibility had crumbled entirely. Veronica had been terminated from her position the same week I'd forwarded her inappropriate communications with my husband to her professional licensing board. The consulting industry in Portland was smaller than most people realized. Her reputation was effectively finished. I'd expanded the business by 40%, hired 3 brilliant analysts, and secured 2 additional major contracts based solely on the success of the Gravora project. The company that Carter had planned to steal from me was now thriving beyond either of our original dreams, and it was mine alone. Sometimes, late in the evening when I reviewed my work, I thought about that morning, 6 months ago, how he'd handed me that coffee with such smug satisfaction, so certain he was about to watch me destroy myself, how he'd never imagined that his own arrogance would be his downfall. The beauty of perfect revenge, I'd learned, wasn't in elaborate schemes or dramatic confrontations. It was in simply allowing someone's own malice to consume them, while you stepped aside and claimed the life they tried to steal. Carter had taught me one final valuable lesson. Never trust someone who would poison your coffee, but more importantly, always make sure you know which cup is which. In the end, justice had been served in the most fitting way possible. He drank deeply from the cup of his own treachery, and I'd inherited everything he thought was his. As I looked toward the future, I couldn't help but smile at how perfectly the tables had turned in my favor.